ended up in St. Augustine,
Okay.
and the other end of the trail ended up in Tampa.
Dave, back again. I was fascinated last time, so we're doing a follow-up here before I head back to the Ohio for the springs.
Let's see where we left off last time. So we found the normal assemblage of historic artifacts that we find on the site: glass, musket balls, other lead shot, smoking pipes, historic ceramics, and then prehistoric stuff. So, but the main thing that we're looking for is the blacksmith shop right here. So we've had a especially high concentration of nails, and then in particular, as I mentioned last time, we've had these upwells of clay. So like over there on the high rise of one of the last units that we worked on, you can still see the spatters of clay right there. So basically my colleague over there spent the last couple weeks plotting where the artifacts have been coming from. A lot of the nails we'll run a metal detector over, and we'll try to get the exact plots, the exact locations of each nail. And then when we're shovel testing or we're shovel skimming, we'll be able to come across individual artifacts and then piece plot them that way. So he's been plotting those, and then plotting those with what we're calling features, the posts, the potential posts here, marked by the clay. And so we're trying to figure out the layout now of it. We're pretty sure we have it. We've got enough things like clinkers and other blacksmithing debris that we've been finding in moderate quantities. And so the idea was, where do we go next? So with the layout of this, we kind of have a diagonal layout. So if you look at that line, it runs kind of like this. So you kind of got this line going in this direction here. So basically behind that stick is where we think one of the corners would be. And so we were kind of trying to decide where do we want to go, because we would like to find the 90-degree bend in this to confirm that this is in fact a building that's roughly about 10 foot by 10 foot. So the other corner would be over there under that pile of dirt, and then we would have a corner over here. So the issue with some of these is obvious, is that one requires more work to remove all the grass over there. That would require us to move the backfill pile. So let's try this, and then hopefully we can also see if there's avoidant artifacts over here, where we had a couple more potential posts suggesting that there's probably another smaller building over in this direction. So we started excavating out this yesterday. But as you can see, there's limestone here. You can see that there's limestone down here. And then this yellow stuff is the fill sand from when they constructed this fort. So this is a divot. You're getting modern trash all the way down here. This is a layer of plastic. So this is well into what should be the historic depth. But we're getting fill from when the people lived here. This is potentially a pathway that was coming up from here, and they were basically filling in the divots this way. So this was incredibly compact. It's very, very dark, unnaturally dark in this location. So we decided, let's only take the easternmost 2 feet of this unit, because we originally had this section here. And then we opened up this unit here, which is more natural, more of what we consistent with what we normally find here. So we're kind of in the early stages. We're still basically contemporaneous with the house over there. We're just kind of get started. We've done our cursory search with the metal detector. We found several pieces of small lead shot, way smaller than musket balls, and then a handful of nails that will basically kind of add into the patterning and see what that tells us.
Would they have made the nails here, or would they have brought them in?
So what they probably would have come in is around 1830, you start getting machine cut nails. So before that, you have what are called square cut nails, and these are rectangular. And so what they would have done is they basically would have had a sheet of them where they pretty much only would have to snap off each individual nail. Now, once you're out here, this was a very remote location. Basically, supplies would have been coming in at a place called Picolata on the St. Johns River, near somewhat close to St. Augustine, or they would have had to come in from Pensacola or Tampa Bay, or St. Augustine itself. And so it was quite a trek. There weren't a lot of roads in this area, so these people were literally out in the wilderness in the middle of nowhere. So once they ran out of nails, if they didn't have any more sheets, they would have to start making themselves, or they would basically be repurposing old nails, and nails would have been like gold. The real historic zone will start about right here. So we'll start seeing nails at this point, and then the key thing that we're looking for are these clay layers here, which are representative of the posts. So hopefully we'll find more nails in conjunction with this, and ideally we'll find, like we're getting upwells of clay right here, we'll find kind of a bend in the clay roughly around, maybe in this spot.
So what is the clay? What's that indicating with the clay exactly?
So the clay is several feet farther down, where it naturally occurs. So what this means is something is actively bringing it up. There's a lot of mole activity around here, but they don't really do that. Instead, you get the darker soil going across the lighter colored soil, basically that I'm standing on. So the clay means that posts that were driven all the way down to the clay layer, because you'd really want to plant them in, when those get ripped up, which is what we think that this is probably the second blacksmith shop, or a blacksmith shop associated with the second fort, meaning it wasn't burned in place with the first fort. So when this place was dismantled to build the city of Ocala, they were basically ripping up the posts, and then the nails are falling out with it. So that is the lower earth being brought up, and then we've plotted nails. We've seen them associated with it, so it just makes the most sense out of it.
So how do you decide where to dig and everything else when you guys first got here? What was the
years ago, about 10 years ago, my colleagues did basically a whole series of units across most of the site. And this area had a high amount of metal and a high amount of smithing debris. I mean, the site has a lot of metal on it anyways, a lot of nails throughout the whole area, but this was a particularly high concentration, and you were getting things like clinkers associated with blacksmithing. So it was just a higher percentage here. And then so that unit was located over there, so we opened up adjacent areas. And then once you start seeing clay at first, you have to kind of determine what that means, and then when you start seeing patterns of it, then it, kind of comes to life. Includes, let's see, the little pieces of lead shot. So each cartridge load would have had about 3 of these per one full musket ball.
Okay, so it's buck and ball basically.
Buck and ball, exactly. Yes. Pipe fragment. We've had concentrations of pipe stems and pipe bowls. So apparently the blacksmith was a very heavy smoker. We found at least 4 separate pipes, I would say, and probably way more than that. And then these are the types of nails that we're looking for. So modern nails typically are, you could still buy square and rectangular nails to this day, but most of them are wire cut, so they've got round heads. They're round, and it's got a wire core that basically when they corrode, it breaks apart. Now this is a rectangular nail, and then it has a rectangular L-shaped head, suggesting that it's historic early 1800s.
Is that one of the pattern broken ones, or is that something they made here?
That probably would have been one of the ones off the sheets, yeah. The older ones before that would have been rose head nails, and basically what those are is they tend to be more square in shape, and then the head is flattened and it's kind of beveled down, where basically it's being made into a hole, and then the blacksmith is hammering the head onto it. And then I'll pull it out, and he'll then be able to kind of track down where it came from. All right, we got a pipe. So there we go, pipe bowl, decorated pipe bowl, vertical striations. So, like I said, all right, that probably brings us up to like 6 pipes now. So he knows generally where it came from.
What's that from, you guys? Is that just... Is that going to be from like a...
Maybe a little softer or something.
That's cool. So what size do you think the shop actually was?
Right now it's looking like roughly about 10 foot by 10 foot, maybe a little bit larger. One of the questions was, how many outbuildings, how many associated buildings are there? Was the blacksmith living in the area? Right now there's enough casual debris that it could be associated just generally with the fort getting moved around, plowing, moving around artifacts, but it probably does suggest that the blacksmith was here. And then, like I said, we have a couple other posts that we haven't figured out what that is, but it's probably just a secondary building associated with it. And then on top of that, there would have just been a ton of structures around here for various things, all the way to maybe even keeping wood dry. Yeah, and then so one thing that I was looking at last night was one of our previous projects was on the Fort King Road itself, so between Tampa Bay at Fort Brooke at Tampa Bay and Fort King in Ocala. What we did is we looked at muster reports for different forts along the way, and you can kind of track how units moved, and maybe how the road was used, how logistics were used during the war, since this was one of the main avenues to move through, especially in the early parts of the war when the war was concentrated around the Withlacoochee River. So I was basically looking at who reported either having blacksmiths, farriers, or artificers. So some of the units would have actually moved with their own personal blacksmiths. And dragoons, which would have been up until 1850s, they were called dragoons before they became cavalry. But those would have been your mounted soldiers. Most companies traveled with their own farrier, because you needed somebody to rehorse the shoes. They would have had a wagon, their own little forge, small anvil and all that.
Classic farrier service.
Everything they needed. And so I was looking at the things, the second dragoons who were active during the war here, they always had them. Whereas artificers are more commonly listed with artillery units.
What's an artificer?
Basically, it would have been kind of like a sort of what we would call like a mechanic today, but some of these terms are kind of interchangeable. An artificer probably would have been somebody who could have fixed wagons, done some woodworking, maybe even leather work, but probably could have been a makeshift blacksmith or gunsmith as well.
All trades, kind of.
Yeah, kind of.
Awesome.
So basically you would have had somebody to maintain the artillery, even though artillery units didn't really have a lot of artillery during this war. There were only, the average fort maybe had one cannon, if that. And then an average campaign only consisted of 1 or 2 cannons on the move. Would have been a mountain-style howitzer like you've got in there. You would have needed something light. Yeah, it's not really the most effective gun for this kind of warfare, but it would have been light and easy to move around when you don't really have roads. So artillery units would have had that. Infantry units never list either. So they just never felt the need. So if infantry units needed any blacksmithing work done, they would have had to come to a fort that already had one supplied.
What would he have had in his shop? I'm just kind of curious on what you think.
So right now, since we're not finding hearths or a brick forge or large charcoal dumps or anything like that, large piles of clinkers, I suggest that it probably would have been a mobile forge. Like you would have had, again, they would have had an anvil. Anvils would have been more common than the anvil-shaped objects that we use today, such as railroad tracks and stuff like that. It probably would have just been a small mobile coal forge, and that they probably would have had to make a lump charcoal out of wood. I doubt they were traveling with a ton of blacksmithing coal themselves. So it probably would have been a very mobile thing. One thing that I don't know personally, my colleagues who are more familiar with the forts might know whether or not this was an official soldier or this might have actually been a civilian. Some things indicate that the Indian Agency located farther to the west would have had its own blacksmith shop, but once the war started, and especially as the war gets closer, the Indian agent starts spending more and more time here rather than in the seclusion, and he still gets assassinated at the very start of the war anyways. He was a decent distance from the fort. Yes, he was out of range of immediate protection, and and Osceola and any other Seminoles associated with him easily got away before the military could respond. So there was a blacksmith shop at the Indian Agency. As soon as the war started, almost assuredly the blacksmith was here. So it's quite possible that from 1827 to 1835, there was no blacksmith here. It might have been over there, and they might have just gotten all the goods they needed. Because so your average garrison is usually an artillery company. Again, artillerymen didn't necessarily have a cannon with them, or any type of field gun with them, so they would have been used as light infantry. There would have been about 30, like I said, per fort, and then so if other units are coming in. Like at one point in 1840, there were over 1,000 men here, and they just would have set up camps all around. you don't really want to spend a lot of time in the fort. It would have been, squalid, probably would have been, probably would have smelled bad. It would have been very compact. And there were several buildings inside: officers' quarters, probably a mess building, your or your weapons depot. You would have had basically a small little bunker built to, house your powder and your other ammunition. So, most people would have spent as much time out of the fort as possible, and then it was only whenever you'd hear like a gunshot, and a lot of the deaths associated with forts would be where people would go to like a nearby river, such as like Fort Foster on the Hillsborough River. If people would go fishing and they were like left alone, Seminoles would come over and shoot the guy, and then everyone would kind of run into the fort. So that's really how most of those went. There weren't a lot of straight attacks on any of these forts. So they were relatively secure places. And then especially as the war moves farther and farther south, this eventually would have been, fairly safe. So this area would have all been deforested basically as far as the eye could see. And there would have been encampments. At the start of the war, there were at least 2 Seminole settlements, probably within about 6 miles of here.
What was their population like? Do you know?
Demographics are a little tough to say. The estimates at the beginning of the war are somewhere between 3,500 and 5,000. And again, that depends whether or not you're considering warriors or all people. But usually the estimate is that the maximum estimate is there might have been up to 5,000 warriors. That probably would have been close to the entire population though. So like large engagements, you maybe have up to 1,000, maybe 1,500 Seminoles and Black Seminoles engaged at one time. And even then, those numbers are kind of dubious. Soldiers tend to exaggerate. You don't want to, especially if these are battles that you lose, you don't want to, admit that you lost to a size of like 100 men, which is quite possibly what it could have been, because Seminoles would basically hide behind a tree, fire, and would move. And so you've got this basically crescent shape formation, and they're constantly moving around. So it makes it very difficult to actually tell how many people were there.
They're still using the open field tactics at that point, or?
Yeah, and they what we know about Native American tactics, we see a lot of like French and Indian wars, and would have come out of a lot of their hunting strategies. A lot of the indications would that there would have been these big crescents, and they usually would have left the American soldiers a way out. They rarely tried to envelop. They rarely tried to envelop them. They destroyed the entire column at Dade's battle, and then after that, they usually don't try to obliterate the entire army, because every time they kill off all the American soldiers, more soldiers come. And so the idea is basically kind of tire out the American military than just try to eliminate them. The American military, on the other hand, took the entire opposite stance of just eliminate or remove. That was it. So their battle strategy was always to try to pin down the Seminole, which the Seminole used terrain much better and were always able to escape. Rarely did they ever really get pinned down. And most of the time, whenever they got captured, it was generally women and children who were surprised in like a village. Warriors generally knew exactly where the military was at any given time.
So when you guys lay a site like this out before you dig, is it based on like GPS coordinates, or what's your?
This one, yes, there's a grid that's set up here. So we have surveyors from the city come out, and we have certain datum points. So we'll have them come out and set a certain series of posts wherever we're going to be working. So there should be a permanent datum now in the middle of the fort, so that when we do work on the interior, that we know where we're at. So like that pink stake over there, that was shot in by the surveyors, and then we measure off personally, where we want to go. They gave us a couple points, and then we resume. So all of the excavations since 1993 have a consistent grid. Right, so it's a haversack buckle. So basically, that's the buckle that would have gone to the backpack, a supply pack that a soldier would have worn. Yeah, it's brass. And then a very corroded iron nail. This fort was occupied for just under 20 years. 17 years. So, thousands of people went through here. And then of course prehistoric people lived here for 10,000 years before that. So, that's a lot of time to leave debris. People we'll
I
drop
guess you just
stuff
don't think
on.
about it, but it makes a lot of sense. We're not any neater now than we were back then.
No, oh no, I mean we're way worse because everything's disposable now. But I mean, think about it like, how often do you drop a penny and it's like, yeah, it's a penny.
Yeah,
What do
yeah.
do people even find it anymore? And then all the stuff that you randomly lose. If you lose your car keys, you're gonna try to find your car keys, but so stuff, but it might still end up, just in the middle of nowhere. So, stuff that both you want and you're intentionally leaving behind, gets deposited across the landscape. Everywhere where people have been, there's stuff that they left behind.
Yep.
You could find the first areas that Columbus landed based on, suddenly these new style of artifacts start appearing in a place, that shouldn't have these artifacts.
Right.
So when I first started professionally doing archaeology, I worked on Fort Benning, and we found a AR-15 once leaning up against a tree. I'm sure that private caught hell.
Where'd you leave it? I don't know.
Yeah, and it's like, because they all have serial numbers, they know which one is sent out to each one. So we had to report that to the firearms civilians who work there.
We're using a method where doing the shallow metal detection so we can pick up metal where nails are. Nails are everything for structures. And and the nails are, some of them are like brand new and other ones are just almost rusted away. But by the time you mark everything in place, the whole that. So where he's working now is this block right here.
Oh.
So the nails are coming in as we expected along this line here. So this is a line of structures, post hole, post hole, post hole, post hole. Then there's a right angle there, and then over here, down in this corner, you can actually see the structure. See the white stuff in the hump?
Mm-hmm.
And then the square is a post hole, but there's multiple post holes in that. So there's a building foundation here, there's a line of post here, a line of post there, and when the nails match up, then you get a sense that this is a plank building, and not, so they're probably hand-sawed planks with just a couple of post holes to nail to. So it's a crude structure, but there may be more than one here. I mean, it's good to have post holes, but we've got a whole bunch of them. And this fort was occupied twice, 1827 to 36 and 1837 to 44.
Find any petrified wood or whatever? There's a too new for petrified wood.
Right, but we'll find the wood shadow, and sometimes
What's a wood shadow?
that's where the wood is completely deteriorated away, but there's some organic debris left.
Oh.
And sometimes you'll see the nails sticking right up out of it.
Oh my gosh.
And you can
Oh,
photograph that and that and that.
Yeah, this is a small nail fragment.
That gap right there between the trees ended up in St. Augustine,
Okay.
and the other end of the trail ended up in Tampa. Okay. About every 20 miles or so, there was a military outpost, or what they considered a good day's march. And so this was a series of forts that went, again, from Fort Brooke in Tampa, now here's the funny part, to Fort Brooks with an S in St. Augustine. Now the fort itself, we built this based on original blueprints. It is from corner to corner 150 feet,
Okay.
which is amazing since the average range of a musket of the day was about 150 feet, 50 yards. We're a work in progress because originally in the center of the field here was a 2-story barracks, and on the top of that was a cupola that there would be a sentry. He would be able to see 360 degrees around the fort, and if he saw trouble coming, he would ring a cowbell. The towers on either corner are the exact same floor print or footprint. They have access windows facing all sides of the fort and out to the woods so they could see anything coming as well. If you look along the walls of the fort, you'll see a cutout every so often, and that is to accommodate them shooting muskets out through the walls. It was designed to keep the peace for him and also the settlers that were moving in. For the most part, until, well, President Jackson got greedy and started his land grab, it was kind of a, I don't want to say a complete peace between them, because there were still renegades going stealing food and all that. But there was an agreement between the Seminoles and the Europeans, or all Americans at that time. And they pretty much kept to themselves, did a little trading. Again, the Seminoles were a cattle raising group, and they would trade cattle for goods and so forth. Well, the land did lend itself for raising cattle. Certain food groups, the weather was rather, for the most part, pleasant year-round. We didn't get the snows winter. Summers were brutally hot, just like they are now. It was typical to put the fort on the high ground, and this was the high area for this county.
Did the other forts have water sources like this spring, or is this fairly unique for this one?
There was, I'm trying to think of the name of it. One up near the peninsula was at a river. Yeah, they tried to be as close to a water supply as they could. And that way, I mean, our water supply is about maybe 400 yards from this spot. But it was necessary because that's where it was coming out of the ground, and they wanted the high ground for the fort. So I'm sure they had daily or weekly travels down there with horse and wagon.
Are there any, besides the blacksmith shop, are there any other structures? I know about I think it's quarters that were over by the handicap parking spot. Anything else around here that's going to get put in?
Well, again, we're hoping to put the barracks in here.
That would be neat.
There was a kitchen building in here, and there was also, would be the armory was inside here. Based on the drawings of the day, that was some outbuildings as well, and typical of the times when there was a fort or military outpost, settlers came and were relatively close to. I'm not sure if they're going to do a settlers homestead or not. I think that would be neat.
Yeah.
But that's at the bottom of our list. We're, again, working one step at a time, with the blacksmith shop being next. I've always enjoyed history in general. Been a Civil War reenactor for well over 40 years. Just the different aspects of history. This was private property up until about 2000, so I really didn't realize what was here.
Okay.
So when I got the opportunity to volunteer out here and learn things, this table is what I like to call the common soldier table. It shows what the fellows would have to deal with on a daily basis. You got the hygiene, you got the entertainments. Most important thing to a soldier, besides clean, dry socks, is his meals. The food stuff on the plate, you have salt pork, beans, and the crackers are army bread or hardtack. These two particular pieces are actually real, and I would estimate they're about 15 years old. When we have kids in here, we tell them this story. It comes in 3 flavors, or 4 actually. Plain, infested with weevils, moldy, and then the blue plate special is moldy on one side with the weevils having a dance party on. They would float it in their coffee until it became mushy, like almost an oatmeal consistency, and they'd eat it like a cereal. Or they'd take the salt pork and render it down to its fats, and then float the hardtack into the grease there, and it would absorb all the liquids and kind of make a bacon flavored pan. So game was fairly available. The Seminole were actually raising cattle around the area too, so there was beef available.
That's cool.
When the Spaniards had Florida, beef was a commodity between the tribe and between the Spanish Europeans, and they would trade goods for good fresh beef.
So hopefully you enjoy the video, and thanks for watching. Caribou Dave, the Adventure Dog. Remember to like, thumbs up, and subscribe. And as always, remember that try to do what you can, wherever you are, with whatever you have. Thanks for watching, and also don't forget to check out the meetup on the Mohican coming up in June of 2020 this spring.
Ring a cowbell.
And that's where it was just like, what if one of us is in the witness protection program?
Ring a cowbell.
But you would literally have dozens of people standing at a fence like a zoo just taking photos of you.
Ring a cowbell.
There's birds humping on the flagpole.
Oh, wow. I'm glad it's getting some use.
Sorry.
I don't think that's ever happened before. It was majestic.